There he is, life. Oh, some say he's good, short, funny, even a bit crazy, but life has a way of catching up to you. Life happens. Are you ready?
Well, life does have a way of happening to us, and it comes in ways that we don't expect it. And so that's why first weekend of January, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, we start a new series, 5-week-long series entitled Set for Life. And love to have you come and join us for that series, and one that I think potentially could be life-changing. Dave Ramsey will be with us that first weekend, and love to have you come and join us. Well, life does happen, and so writer Carter Featherstone tells how actually life came at him in a very unexpected way when he was in the 5th grade. And you do realize, don't you, that for pre-adolescent boys, nothing good ever happens in the 5th grade. And so Carter, as he's writing, he says he grew up skinny and slow, which he said that's a combination where nobody mistakes you for a gifted athlete. And so he writes this about himself. He says, I wasn't very strong either, but early in grade school, my friends and I, we accepted each other. I was an average kid, feeling mostly adequate and self-secure, and life was pretty good. We rode bikes, we played along the irrigation ditch, we built forts in fields, in backyards, and even up in trees. We shot our BB guns and fished. All was well, he said, through the 4th grade. Then, for me, life changed forever in the 5th grade. Now, you do know, don't you, that for 5th grade boys, there are 2 places that are feared more than any place else on earth. One of those places happens to be the PE class. And it's feared for a number of reasons. One reason is you're just always in fear that the coach is going to ask you to climb the rope in front of the rest of the class. Or you're just anxious about the fact that you're going to be choosing up teams, and are you going to be the last one standing? Or if they do choose up teams, somebody on one of the teams is going to shout out, hey, let's play skins versus shirts, and you're going to end up on the skins team. And nothing good happens for 5th grade boys in PE. But equally dreadful to the PE class is picking out where you're going to sit in the lunchroom at the school cafeteria each and every day. And so Carter Featherstone talks about sitting at the lunch table one day with some of his closest friends. One of the friends' names was James. James happened to be the biggest kid in the class, outweighed the entire class, and so therefore he was considered the toughest kid in the class, but he was so big that he wasn't even allowed to play on the school football team for fear he would hurt others. And so they're sitting at the table that day. Somebody noticed that there's a new kid around. And this new kid is wearing this black shiny jacket. And so somebody at the table makes a statement. He thinks he's tough in his shiny new jacket. And somebody else said, yeah, somebody ought to beat him up. Now, if you're a pre-adolescent boy, you just need to understand this is the eternal question. And it doesn't matter why somebody needs to beat somebody up, but the question is always this: who can beat up who? And it's never a discussion about why. That doesn't matter why. It's just figuring out the pecking order. Who can beat up who? And it takes place at every 5th grade table, and taking place here. And Carter said as that discussion was going on, what came out of James, the biggest kid in the class, what came out of his mouth changed Carter Featherstone's life forever. And this is what James said. James said, yeah, I'd like to beat him up, but he looks too big. I don't think I could. And Carter said it was a wake-up call for him, because in that moment he realized if James, the biggest kid in the class, can't beat up this new kid, nobody else at his table could beat up this new kid. Nobody else in the class could. And so he instantly started looking around the lunchroom trying to find somebody that Carter, thought he could beat up, just to know he's not at the bottom of the pecking order. And he said it was a wake-up call for him. Now, I can remember a wake-up call in my 5th grade class as well. I'd played football for years with my best friend Bill Biaggi. We played in the backyard. We played tackle football. It was just the 2 of us. We thought we were really pretty good football players. Then came our first day of organized football. It's actually a real team with real uniforms and real opponents. And so it was the first play of the very first game. And I was introduced in that moment to a guy named Eric Sinclair. I was on offense, Eric was on defense, I was the center, and the moment I snapped the ball, Eric Sinclair came across the line, ran over me like a Mack truck, left me flat as a pancake, and I had never, ever seen anybody like Eric Sinclair. He was a giant. Now, I found out some things about him a little later. Turns out his dad actually played football for the San Francisco 49ers. Didn't just play for him, he played for him for 14 years. Not only did he play for 14 years, he was selected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but even beyond that, he was so good that the city of San Francisco, they renamed Kezar Stadium, where the 49ers played at that time, to St. Clair Stadium in honor of Eric's dad. Not only that, I found out Eric's dad, Bob, is the tallest player ever inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He stands 6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds. The incredible thing is, at least in my mind, in the 5th grade, Eric was even bigger than his dad. And he came over me, and it was a wake-up call for me. Now, Carter Featherstone said right there in that grade school cafeteria, life changed for him. Right there at the Jefferson Elementary School cafeteria, he was introduced to something he'd never been introduced to before. And what he was introduced to was shame. Shame. And this is what he said. He said, shame, like a demon, flew into my heart. I knew I was skinny, weak, and scared. I didn't like who I was. I didn't like how I was. I was growing more and more ashamed of how God had made me. And he said, I was introduced to shame. I didn't like who I was. Now, my guess is you've been introduced to shame as well. Because shame is built off of pain. Shame is built off of fear. Shame is built off of hurtful experiences. And shame is built around this sense of inadequacy or defeat or our imperfections, whether they're real or perceived. We see them and we just begin to become ashamed of who we are. And the thing about shame is it's self-induced, meaning it's in our minds. We come up with what we're ashamed of. And so the problem is wherever we go, shame follows us. We can never be relieved of it. And shame is more than just an emotion. It's actually an identity, and it affects who we think we are. And so because of shame, it's so powerful, then we tend to want to hide. Sometimes we try to run. Most often, we just try to pretend that we're somebody different than we really are. And my guess is you've been introduced to shame. My guess is you've probably tried to run, maybe hide. My guess is you may even now be pretending to be somebody very different than you know you really are on the inside. And history actually tells us that one day Jesus had a conversation with somebody that had also been introduced to shame. We're actually told this is the longest recorded conversation that Jesus ever had. And so it was a hot, sunny day, and the sun was beating down on Jesus on his forehead, and he's walking along a dusty road, and probably mid-July, which means the temperature was up to 100, 105 degrees. And so he comes to a well on a rock ledge, and it's built up above the ground. And so he sits down on the lip of the well, and as he's sitting there, my guess is he's thinking, man, I would love to have a drink of water. Right about that moment, along comes a woman walking alone to the well. Now, you need to understand it's unusual for a woman to be walking to the well alone. Traditionally, the women looked forward to going to the well to gather water together. It was a social time. It was a way to swap stories. And the women came together also out of safety concerns because this well was about 1.5 miles from town. And so they came together as a group. It was a fun environment, occasion. This was the wrong time of the day. Normally, they would come in the cool of the morning. This was midday, and all of this was different. And this woman was very different. She'd come to the well alone at the wrong time of the day. And what we begin to find out is she actually had, I guess what you'd say, she had a backstory. And because of her backstory, she wasn't welcome to travel with the other women. She wasn't invited to walk with them to the well. And see, the truth is she was hiding, and she'd been introduced to shame. And because of shame, she's pretending to be somebody different than she really is. And psychologist Henry Cloud, he actually says when we're introduced to shame, typically it comes with one event. One event will start shame in our lives. And he says that one event causes us to have in the idea in our minds, I'm a loser. Because of this event, I'm a loser. But he says it begins to take birth and it grows in our minds and in our hearts and in our lives. And it goes from I'm a loser to my whole life is bad. I can't do anything good in my life. And he says if it continues and it goes on and on to the point where we begin to realize nothing good is ever going to happen in my life. Nothing's going to change. I'm always going to be a loser just the way I am in my life. And so this woman came to the well all by herself in the middle of the day. because she'd been introduced to shame, and because of shame, she's hiding. And my guess is because of shame, she's thinking, you know what, I'm a loser. My whole life is bad. Nothing's going to change, just the way it is in my life. And so you know what Jesus did? Jesus actually initiates a conversation with this woman. He asks a real simple question. He just said, would you please mind giving me a drink of water? To which this woman responds, how can you, a Jew, ask a Samaritan woman like me for a drink of water? Because you see, in those days, Jews wouldn't be caught dead talking to a Samaritan, let alone a Samaritan woman. And yet what you need to understand about Jesus never worried about being politically correct. He was reckless with his love and who he talked to. And so he was always hanging out on people on the outskirts, the fringe of society. And he doesn't even have to hear her story. And he knows that she's struggling with shame. She wears shame on her sleeve. And so Jesus turns the conversation from just talking about drinking water, and he swerves into this discussion talking about life in general. And so he makes this statement to her. He says, look, if you knew who I am, if you understood who you were talking to, he says to this lady, you would be asking me for a drink of water. In other words, if you knew who I am, you would be asking me for water. I wouldn't be asking you for water. And he says, I would give you a drink of living water. If you understood who I am, you would be asking me for water. I would give you a kind of water you've never, ever had before. He says, those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Jesus says, look, if you knew who I was, you would be asking me for water, and I would give it to you. And it would be different than anything you've ever experienced before. It would be life-changing for you, and it will last for eternity. And to which the woman hears this, and she says, sir, give me this water. I'll take it. Because this woman was thirsty too. I mean, she had a thirst for meaningful relationships. She had a thirst for love and just acceptance. And Jesus is talking about quenching the thirst of a dry and empty and parched heart. And something was stirring inside of this woman. And she's just ready to receive this offer of this incredible drink from Jesus when Jesus again turns the conversation. And he maybe somewhat stuns this woman because he begins to expose her story, her backstory. And so he asks her a question. He makes a statement. He says, look, first, I want you to go and I want you to get your husband. Go get your husband and then come back and I'll give you this water together. To which she responds, I don't have a husband. Now remember, she's hiding. Because of shame in her life, she's pretending to be somebody that she's really not. And so she says, I have no husband, to which Jesus replies. And when you see his reply, you think he's being harsh. But Jesus says, you're right in saying you have no husband, because you actually had 5. And the one that you live with right now, he's not your husband either, is he? Isn't that true? And what we realize in that moment is that Jesus knew her story, and he knew what was inside of her all along. And can I just say, he knows what's inside of you as well. And whatever you may be trying to hide, you may think you're hiding your story from God, but you're not. I mean, he knows, and here's the thing. He knows your story. He's not mad at you. He knew her story, and he wasn't mad at her. He wanted to quench her thirst, and he's not mad at you either. He wants to quench your thirst as well. And because he knows your story, what it means is he also knows all the broken places in your heart. And this woman's heart needed healing. From 5 rejections and divorces. She needed healing of the shame that she was carrying from 5 broken relationships. And so Jesus draws her into conversation, and he got her just to tell her story, not because he was mad at her, not because he wanted to condemn her or judge her or stomp on her, or throw more shame on her. Instead, he wanted to heal her. He wanted to transform her. He wanted to free her from the shame that she was experiencing. And she needed forgiveness. She needed acceptance. She needed love. And she needed to be released from her shame. And so Jesus draws her into conversation. As they converse, she begins to sense that Jesus is somebody different than anybody that she'd ever met before. And so at that point, the woman actually leaves her pail at the well, and she runs back into town. And she doesn't run back into town because she's offended by Jesus. She doesn't run back into town because she's trying to hide from Jesus. Instead, she runs back into town because she knew that he was somebody special. She later says, he's the Messiah. He's the Savior of the world. And so she leaves her jar. She runs back into town. Everybody that she can see, she's calling and saying, look, won't you come and see? You need to come and see this man that told me everything that I ever did in my life. And what about your past? And what's your backstory? I mean, what is it in, you're pretending it's not there, but you know it's there. I mean, are you discouraged? Are you ashamed? Are you angry at yourself? Are you angry at someone else? Do you have doubts that God could possibly love you? I mean, do you think that God is disappointed with you? Are you disappointed with God? And I mean, here's what I know. Just like the woman at the well, because of our shame, our tendency is to hide. Because of our shame, our tendency is to try to run, to avoid our story, to avoid talking about our story. And here's the problem. When we avoid talking to our story to Jesus, when we say, Jesus, I'm not going to talk about my story with you, we also avoid healing. And every one of us needs healing. And so I just ask, what's in your story that's weighing you down with shame? And perhaps for you, maybe your story is just full of a parent's rage with slaps and pulls and yanks and beatings. Or maybe for you, your story includes violence or trauma, or abuse of the very worst kind. Or maybe for you, it involves loneliness from abandonment, or does it include addictions, or just anger, or sadness, or pain, or is it the tearing apart of divorce? Or for you, maybe you say it's just school day humiliations. When I was a kid, I was just humiliated, started me down this track. Or for others, it may be broken hearts and lovers that run away, and all you know is you find yourself saying, you know what, I'm a loser, and nothing is going to change. But you pretend to be somebody else. See, out of our stories emerge broken hearts. Broken hearts weighted down by shame. And on the outside, we do everything we can to appear that everything's fine. And so we pretend to be somebody we're not, but on the inside, we're thinking, I'm a loser. My whole life is bad. It's never going to change. It'll never be different for me. And like the woman at the well, we pretend to be somebody we're not. And you put on a good face, we all put on a good face, but you know, your heart is broken with shame. And see, Christmas is all about the birth of a baby named Jesus. And it's about a cute, cuddly baby named Jesus, but it's about so much more than a cute, cuddly baby. Christmas is all about God himself coming into the world as a human being in the form of a baby named Jesus. And that baby Jesus grows up to be a man named Jesus. And Jesus, the God-man, because he's God in the form of a human being, comes to you and he comes to me and he invites us into a conversation, just like he invited the woman at the well into a conversation. And he invites us into a conversation because he understands it's in that conversation that healing and transformation is going to come. It's in that conversation that our lives are going to be changed. And what Jesus can do, Jesus can remove the haunting of pain and anger. Jesus can remove the frustration of fear. He can heal us from hurtful memories that just play over and over and over in our minds. We can't shake them. And Jesus can cancel the power of a wounded identity. And he can give us a brand new identity. And so the woman at the well, she goes back into town. Everybody she could see, she says, come on, come and see. Come and see this man. And so they did. And they come out of the town and they meet Jesus and they begin to converse with Jesus. And they converse so much that eventually he goes back into town with them. He stays with them for 2 full days. And after those 2 full days, they come to a real similar conclusion about Jesus that the woman at the well actually had. And this is what they say to her. Now we believe, not just because of what you told us, woman at the well. We're not believing because of what you said, but we have heard for ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Savior of the world. And it's this incredible thing that happens when we engage in a conversation with Jesus. In time, you just kind of come to the conclusion, there's something different here. He just may be the Savior of the world. And Jesus is inviting each and every one of us into a conversation with him. And even though he's inviting thousands of us, actually millions of us, into conversation, the incredible thing is when we get involved and engaged in a conversation with Jesus, it's as though we're talking one-on-one with him. Nobody else is around. It's just you and Jesus, me and Jesus, one-on-one. And it gets real personal. I think maybe one of the saddest statements or stories in the entire Bible is found in the story of 2 brothers. You may have heard their names. Their names were Cain and Abel. In anger, Cain murders his brother Abel. And so in shame, because of murdering his brother, Cain runs and hides. And so God actually approaches Cain. And as he approaches him, just to have conversation, not to judge him, not to condemn him. Cain chooses not to stick around. He doesn't want to be involved with a conversation with God, and so he chooses instead to walk away. This is the way history actually describes it. It says, Cain turned and departed from in front of the face of God. He was face to face with God, had opportunity to engage in a conversation. And rather than engage in the conversation, he took the opportunity, he walks away. In other words, in shame, he turned his back on God and he walked away. And what's so sad is he just wanted a conversation. Not to judge, not to condemn, but to say, you know what, in this conversation, I can free you from your past. And I can let you start over. And you have a story, I have a story. We all have stories. And here's the thing. God knows your story, and he's not mad. He's not mad at you, no matter how dark or how low, no matter how many times you failed, no matter how many times you've succeeded. And it's this authentic conversation with Jesus that all of a sudden our lives are transformed, and it's though we can start over. And Jesus stands with open arms. He says, hey, just come. Come and engage in this conversation with me, not to condemn, not to judge, but to transform. And so my question is, why would we not choose to engage in a conversation with Jesus? And I understand it may seem strange. You say he lived 2,000 years ago. But understand, it's Jesus, the God-man that lived 2,000 years ago. And the incredible thing is, he changed lives 2,000 years ago. He changed the lives of the woman at the well, and he changes the lives of all the people in town as they came to converse with him. But he still changes lives even today, 2,000 years later. One of those lives is a guy by the name of Kevin Kolb. Kevin Kolb is one of us. And like so many of us, Kevin has a backstory. And so Kevin knows shame, and Kevin knows what it means to run and hide. And he knows what it means to be hurting from a broken heart because of shame. But he also knows what it means to engage in a conversation with Jesus. And so I want you to listen to Kevin's story. And as you listen to Kevin's story, put yourself in his shoes. And just ask yourself, what if you were to choose to engage Jesus in a conversation? What if you could start over? Listen to Kevin's story.
Sick Recovery is a long-term recovery program, minimum of 6 months stay. Guys come here to get completely clean. You're completely starting over to build a new life, because that's really the only way you're going to stay clean.
For me, it's my mission in life to help people in not only in adrenaline-based sports, but anywhere that have struggled in life. You know, probably a bigger reason than anything is I don't want anybody to go down the same road I did with how I hurt my family, how I hurt my kids, and what I put them through. You know, that's probably my biggest driver is and pushes me more than anything is to help them not make the same mistakes I did. That's for sure.
Parents got divorced really early. I was 4 or 5 years old, and it was never pretty. They were pretty ugly with each other, and in front of me and my brother. My brother was 7 years older than me, so he was more the father figure than my dad, because my dad was never around. My dad had his struggles with addiction. My brother left for the military, and I had just gone through some things, you know. I had some physical abuse as an infant, and then I had some sexual abuse as a 9, 10-year-old. And right after that happened, and it was neighborhood kids much older neighborhood kids that did it. And right after it happened, my brother left. And I didn't have a trust with my parents because of the way they acted to each other. You know, I had no trust in anybody because I felt like there was just constant betrayal in my life. And that's what really, when I get emotional, I was tired of everybody leaving, you know? And it's funny, as a kid, my mom would always yell, "Will you stop running? Like, why do you have to run everywhere?" I'm just a runner. I ran from life. I was a 23-year-old guy that's drinking and drugging all the time and partying, and all of a sudden I'm gonna have a baby. Well, I ran to drugs. You know, I didn't know how to deal with whatever I didn't know how to deal with. I ran to something. I ran to drugs and alcohol. after 23 for everything. When business got tough at 30, I ran to the bottle. Every bit of money that I had, I was using drugs and alcohol. And life just, went horribly, horribly south. Like I destroyed everyone in my path. I had nowhere to go. I was living in my truck. Lost everything. All the business stuff was repossessed. Vans are repossessed. I had just reached the point where I either wanted to die or change. I had to. I didn't know how to stop hurting people. I didn't know how to be honest with people. I didn't know how to cover up all my shame and guilt, to just tell the truth. I was so fearful of you leaving me that I'm gonna get you first. I would put myself around people that wouldn't tell me the truth. I intimidated them enough. They said what I wanted to hear and it worked. Well, I found a guy that told me what I needed to hear and not what I wanted to hear. And my life started to change.
I went back to ride motorcycles and I started racing motocross, and I got totally addicted, totally into it, the adrenaline rush of it. It was awesome. And then that's how I started helping guys in motocross. We started this team called Head Case MX, and I'm helping other guys, but yet I'm not able to conquer my own anger issues, and it bothered me. I was looking for something else. I then meet my wife. I'm doing all these things right. I'm in therapy. I'm dealing with life. I'm dealing with the past issues. I think I got that under control. I'm helping other guys. I'm racing. I'm doing a lot of things right. Why am I still so angry? I just got into a fist fight at Turkey Hill by our house, and my wife was with me, and something snapped in me. I got in the car and I broke down crying, and I just said to her, I said, something's got to give.
We buy this house and we start fixing it up, and one of my designers is a Christian. He's often talking to me about his church and the music they play, and I'm like, what are you talking about, music? He's like, well, they play really cool music when you start. I'm like what? And he would tell me songs, and I'd listen to a song. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I go to LCBC and I open the door, and I'm literally scared to walk in there. And I see my aunt. I loved her very much. I said I haven't seen her in 15, 20 years. So I walk over to her, and I just stand in front of her, and I said, it's good to see you, Aunt Joe. It's Kevin. And she just started crying. And we talked a little bit, and I went into church, and I loved the music, but I was very uncomfortable with the Jesus part. To believe in something like Jesus Christ, that was like another level of trust. It's easy to say God, but it wasn't easy for me to say Jesus, because then it was real. And I found this series called The Bible. I started watching this series, educating myself. One night, I think I watched it for 6 hours straight. I got to the crucifixion where he was crucified and beaten horribly, and they showed that beating, and I found forgiveness for what I did. And it was like, I'm gonna open my heart. And I said, I finally feel like I truly am forgiven. I'm forgiven for the things I've done to my kids, to my family, to people that didn't deserve anything that I did. I felt all that pain for a purpose. It was amazing, the timing that God just finally said, enough of you doing it your way. Feel this. I want to be the best person I can be for these people, especially for these guys. But for my kids, I want to be outstanding, because I don't have the relationship that I'd like with my children, especially with my oldest. But I know that if I keep following him, he'll guide me back. I really just want a chance. I want a chance for people, for my kids, and for people that knew me to get to know the new me, the one that's reborn in him.